There are moments in life that split everything into two halves, before and after. Before I knew what my sister was capable of, and after the day she tried to have me locked away. I still remember the exact feeling of that morning, the cold air biting at my skin, the sound of shoes on a tile floor, the strange, clinical smell that hits you the moment you walk through hospital doors. I didn't walk through those doors willingly. I was brought there by the one person in the world I thought would never hurt me. My name is Serena, and this is the story of the day my sister tried to destroy me, and the moment a stranger with a file folder saved my entire life without saying a single word. Let me take you back a little, because to understand what happened that morning, you need to understand who I was, and more importantly, who my sister thought I was. I grew up in a military family. My father served for over 20 years. Discipline, silence, and loyalty, those were the three pillars of our household. When I was 18, I followed in his footsteps, not because anyone pushed me, because I wanted to. I wanted to prove something, to myself, to the world, and maybe just a little bit to a father who never said the words, "I'm proud of you," out loud. I served for 8 years. I can't tell you everything about those years. Some of it I'm not allowed to. Some of it I simply choose not to carry into my everyday life anymore. What I can tell you is that I came back changed, quieter, more observant, the kind of person who notices things other people miss, the kind of person who keeps their emotions close to their chest because where I had been, emotions could cost you everything. My sister, Dana, never understood that version of me. She knew the girl I was before I left, the laughing, carefree, younger version of Serena who cried at movies and called her every Sunday. When I came back, I was still me, but different layers had been added, harder layers, protective ones. To Dana, that change looked like a problem. She started small, little comments at family dinners. "You seem so distant, Serena. Are you okay?" said sweetly with concern painted across her face. I thought she was just worried. I thought that was love. Then the comments became concerns, and the concerns became conversations she was having with other people, without me. I found out later she had been talking to our aunt, our cousins, even our mother, telling her that she was worried about my mental state, that I wasn't sleeping, that I was erratic, that I had said things that scared her. None of it was true. But here is the terrifying thing about lies told by someone you love. People believe them. Because why would your own sister make something like that up? I had been living alone for about a year at that point, in a small apartment about 40 minutes from where Dana lived. I kept to myself mostly. I had a routine, a part-time consulting job, and a therapist I saw every 2 weeks, someone I chose voluntarily because I believed in taking care of my mind the same way I took care of my body. I was not in crisis. I was not a danger to anyone. I was healing. Quietly and deliberately, the way I had been trained to do everything else in my life. But what I didn't know that day, the morning Dana showed up at my door with 2 people I didn't recognize, was that she had already made a plan she had been building for weeks, maybe longer. She knocked. I opened the door. She was smiling, that soft, worried smile she had been wearing for months. The 2 strangers behind her introduced themselves. One was a mental health crisis counselor. The other worked for a psychiatric evaluation unit at a hospital across town. She had called them. She had told them I was a danger to myself, that I had made statements, that she feared for my life. I stood there, in my doorway, in my sweatshirt and bare feet, completely blindsided. I looked at my sister, the girl I had shared a bedroom with for 15 years, and I felt something I had never felt in combat, in training, or in any of the hardest moments of my life. I felt afraid. Not of the strangers, not of what was about to happen. I was afraid because I was looking into my sister's eyes and realizing, maybe for the first time, that I did not know her at all. They were calm, professional. They spoke to me in that careful, measured way that people are trained to speak to someone they believe is fragile. And somehow that made it worse, because every word they said reminded me that Dana had painted this picture of me, that her voice, her words, her carefully crafted story had brought these people to my door. I tried to stay composed, because I am composed. That is not a performance. It is years of training, of learning to breathe through panic, of understanding that reacting emotionally in a high-pressure moment is the fastest way to lose control of it. But the calmer I was, the more the counselor nodded slowly, like my calmness itself was a symptom. Dana stood slightly behind them, her arms crossed over her chest, her eyes wet. She was crying. I remember staring at those tears and thinking, she actually practiced this. Or maybe she believed her own story so deeply that the tears were real. That somehow scared me more. "Serena," she said softly, stepping slightly forward, "I'm doing this because I love you. You're not well. You haven't been well since you came back. I can't just watch you fall apart." "I'm not falling apart," I said. My voice was steady. Too steady, probably, for someone who felt like the floor had just disappeared beneath her feet. "That's what worries me," she replied. And there it was, the impossible trap she had built around me. If I was upset, I was unstable. If I was calm, I was dangerously detached. There was no version of me in that doorway that Dana would have accepted as fine. I agreed to go with them, not because I believed I had to, but because I knew that fighting it in that moment would only give them more ammunition. I had been in enough situations to understand when to hold your ground and when to move with the current until you find your footing again. The drive to the hospital was silent. Dana rode in the front of the counselor's car. I sat in the back, watching the city pass by outside the window, running through everything in my mind the way I had been trained to do, assessing, processing, planning. At the hospital, they brought me into a small room, white walls, fluorescent light, a chair and a table and a thin paper covering on an examination bench, the kind of room designed to make you feel small. A nurse took my name, basic questions, date of birth, emergency contact, and then she asked me something that changed everything. "Do you have any prior medical or service records you'd like us to access for context?" I looked at her calmly. "Yes," I said. "You'll want to pull my full file." She typed something, left the room. A few minutes passed, then a few more. The doctor who came in was not the one I had been expecting. He was older, quiet-looking, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He was holding a printed file, thicker than I expected, even though I knew what was in it. He walked in already reading. And then he stopped. He looked up at me, then back at the file, then back at me. I watched his expression shift in real time, from clinical neutrality to something I can only describe as stunned recognition. He sat down slowly, set the file on the table between us, took his glasses off his forehead, and placed them carefully on the bridge of his nose as if he needed another second to think. "Miss Serena," he said quietly, "how long have you been out of service?" "About a year," I said. He nodded, looked at the file again. "And who brought you in today?" "My sister," I said. "She believes I'm a danger to myself." There was a long pause, the kind of pause that holds weight. "I see," he said. He didn't say anything else for a moment, but I watched him, the way he turned pages, the way his jaw tightened slightly, the way he very deliberately closed the file and folded his hands on top of it, and I knew. Without him saying another word, I knew. The room had shifted. What was in that file I won't share in full detail. Some things belong to me and to the years I gave in service to this country. But I can tell you what it meant in that room, on that day. It meant that the doctor was now looking at a woman with a documented, verified, classified psychological clearance history, regular evaluations, passed consistently, signed off by military-grade professionals whose credentials dwarfed anything available in that hospital. It meant he was looking at a service record that showed not instability, but exceptional mental resilience under conditions most people cannot imagine. It meant that the story my sister had told, the fragile, broken, dangerous Serena she had described, did not match a single page in front of him. He stepped out of the room. I sat quietly. I wasn't angry in that moment. I was something calmer than anger, something that felt almost like patience. About 15 minutes later, he came back. Dana was with him. She had clearly been told something because her face had changed. The soft worry was gone, replaced by something more uncertain, more brittle. The doctor spoke carefully, professionally. He explained that based on the records available and his evaluation, there was no clinical basis to proceed with any involuntary hold. He explained that I had come voluntarily, cooperated fully, and shown no indicators that warranted further action. He looked at Dana when he said the next part. It's important that concerns about a loved one come from an accurate understanding of their situation, he said. Making a report of this nature without sufficient basis can have serious consequences for everyone involved. Dana's face went pale. She tried to speak. I was just worried about... He understands, he said, in a tone that made it very clear he did not find the explanation sufficient. But your sister is not in crisis. She is, in fact, quite well. I stood up, smoothed my sweatshirt, picked up my bag, and looked at my sister for a long moment. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't list every wound she had carved into me that morning or the months before it. I just looked at her the way I had learned to look at things, clearly, fully, without flinching. I hope you figure out whatever it is you're really afraid of, I said, because it was never me. And I walked out. The days that followed were not simple. There were family conversations that burned. There were people who took sides and people who went quiet because silence was easier than the truth. Our mother called me 3 times before I answered. When I did, she cried and said she hadn't known how far Dana had taken things. I believe her, some of it at least. Dana faced consequences, not from me, not from a court or a system, but from herself, from the exposure of what she had done. People who believed her concerned sister performance began to see the edges of it differently once the story came out. The cousin who had been her closest confidant went quiet on her. The aunt who had nodded along stopped calling. The most painful kind of consequences are the quiet ones, the ones you can't argue with. As for me, I took the experience and I held it carefully. I let myself be angry in private. I let myself grieve the version of my sister I had believed in. And then, slowly, I let it go. Not for her, for me, because I had spent 8 years learning that carrying unnecessary weight will eventually slow you down, and I was done being slowed down. I still see my therapist every 2 weeks, by choice, because strength is not the absence of struggle, it is the willingness to face it honestly. I think sometimes about that doctor, the way he went still when he opened that file, the way the room changed in that moment. He didn't know my full story, but he saw enough of it to recognize that what was standing in front of him was not what he had been told. And sometimes that is all justice needs to work. One person willing to look at the truth instead of the story they were handed. If you are reading this and someone has tried to convince the world, or even just themselves, that you are broken, that you are too much, that your silence is a symptom or your strength is a threat, let them show their hand. Stay composed, stay grounded, and trust that the truth, when it finally enters the room, has a way of speaking for itself. My sister called me crazy. A doctor saw my file and froze. And in that silence, that single, still moment, everything she had built against me quietly fell apart. Some wars are not won by fighting. They are won by simply refusing to be defeated.